Right, hello everybody, and welcome to COUNTERFORUM, a day of talking about the politics of resistance. My name is Claire Solomon. I'm a member of COUNTERFORUM. I'm also based in this building here. I'm a student in London. I think it's really excellent to see so many people here today, and as the day goes on, I know the discussion and debate is going to be a very interesting day. We've got a lot to talk about. Obviously, the last few months has seen a massive upsurge in the movement, in the students, and in March the 26th, what a magnificent day between 750,000 and 1 million people on the streets, all saying that we don't agree with the cuts that are coming to our society, both here in Britain and also across the world. We've got a number of different sessions for you today. The first one we're going to start off with is, well, it says, the next steps, how protests can change the world. We do have 4 speakers for you. We've had a little bit of travel problems this morning, so we do hope they'll arrive, well, they are going to arrive soon, but we'll get started with the people that we have here so far. And then they'll speak for a few minutes, for 10 minutes or so, and then we'll open up for discussion, questions, suggestions, absolutely anything, and hopefully we'll get a good debate going throughout the day. There is a cafe downstairs that sells some sort of bits and pieces of coffee and water and croissants and things if you need anything. But thanks very much for coming. And our first speaker, I think needs no introduction, but I will do anyway. He's been a magnificent inspiration for us. His name is Glenton. He's used to be a soldier, refused to go back to Afghanistan, and is now a student in Leeds studying politics. And he's been on many of the protests with us recently. So thanks for
Hear me okay? Good. I guess I'm going to try and cover this from the position of someone who probably isn't or wasn't by nature radical or political in any sense, and I see myself as the new guy, which is probably why they're throwing me on first, I suspect. So I'm going to do it from that perspective. And it was a year ago, I was languishing in prison at Her Majesty's pleasure in the military correctional centre, which is deeply Orwellian, I'm sure you'll agree. But it worked, you see, it did correct me. Completely. And I left, aware of precisely which side I was on, and with a burning need to overthrow the government. fully readjusted and reconditioned and ready to lock and load, as they say. And that's probably not the outcome they expected. And since I've emerged from there, this kind of education, and I'm not whinging about prison because it certainly was education, and almost monastic at times because I knew I was there for exactly the right reason. And I think as soon as you open up any subject, and clearly I kind of stumbled into this ugly subject of Afghanistan, but as soon as you open up one, all these other issues emerge, and I've certainly found that at meetings when people come up to me and go, so what do you think about Palestine or the cuts? And then you have to kind of reframe, and I had to go, I don't really know that much. And through that, I mean, that has kind of driven me to try and educate myself more and realise that I'm kind of in this, and all these things are deeply, deeply connected. And you can't kind of pick and choose. You have to be able to engage with all of these subjects if you're really going to kind of ring the changes. And in my view, leading on from that, you can't really call yourself a revolutionary if you do that, if you do pick and choose these subjects. And it is daunting because there's so much of it, and I am, or was until very recently, a kind of lowly squaddy. And so it's fairly terrifying when you look at the scale of the things which are going on in the world which need to be addressed. And so even though I am a kind of gentleman amateur at this, it's clear that you can't be a revolutionary unless you're against Islamophobia. You can't be one unless you tackle discrimination against women, and you attack the arguments for these ridiculous wars, which I can tell you aren't any prettier at that end than they are at this end. And these are all features. I mean, it's not a case of the system kind of being misapplied and these things being anomalous. This is how it works under this system. We will always have war. and you will always have racial discrimination and sexual discrimination. And so you have to tackle the whole thing. And so despite my terror, and I was very worried when I was considering joining Counterfire, that I would have to kind of research a lot and have some kind of encyclopedic knowledge of Marx and Hegel and all these people, which is again terrifying. But then on reflection, I don't need that, because the reality is I'm already in the struggle, and that's how you learn, when you're kind of toe to toe, nose to nose, as we've had a bit of only a few minutes ago outside, which is very well handled. You know, I'm already in it, and realistically, as a working class kid, I've been in it my whole life. But now I know precisely which direction I'm pushing in, and that was the attraction of Counterfire, that within it there are people who will struggle alongside me, and people who are resources, and the fact that they're struggling and what they're learning will help me to do the same. And so the issues are massive, but the creed is really not complicated at all. And it's as simple as my response to Afghanistan, which is, you know, I changed my position, I looked at the facts and reassessed it. And it's as simple as, if it's wrong, you have to oppose it. So you don't need this kind of, you know, massive amount of theoretical knowledge at all. You just need to make that moral decision that that's wrong, and I'm going to fight it, and I'm going to beat it, and I'm going to keep going until it's been completely carved out, and that must be my aim. Thank you.
Thank you, Joe. You have such a wonderful way with words. It's really inspiring to hear you speak. Thanks for that. Our next speaker is Lindsey German. Lindsey has been in the movement since 1969. She went on her first protest, she tells us. She's also the convener of Stop the War, the largest movement against war. And she's a socialist and a writer and an activist and absolutely everything we can think of, fighting all these things. So thank you, Lindsey.
Thanks very much, Claire, and I'd like to firstly just say to extend thanks to Joe for everything he's done really in the movement, because, you know, so much of all movements, when you look at them, are not just about big movements, you know, they are big movements, but they're made up of lots and lots of people who make decisions and who take all sorts of courageous stands over things. And Joe, I think, in the anti-war movement has been one of the most courageous and has suffered a lot in terms of having to go to prison, and as he says, it was nearly as good as going to Eton, I suppose, in terms of the conclusions that came out of it. But nonetheless, these are very difficult choices to make. Now, what I want to talk about today is about protest, if you look at it kind of in context. I mean, the whole way in which we're meant to look at protest is that it doesn't really make any difference. That if change is going to come, it comes anyway, and if you'd only waited for a few years, all these things would have fallen into our laps, because eventually the majority of people would have seen good sense and would have taken the right decisions. Now, my view is that very little has happened in this country, and very little change has happened without protest. I mean, I would refer you to the election results yesterday. You only had to look at Nick Clegg's face to see the effect of protest, both with the student demonstrations and with the big demonstration against the cuts on March the 26th. The Liberals would have done badly in this election, but there is no doubt that the mass demonstrations that took place over the last 6 months have made a lot of difference in terms of people's political consciousness and in terms of people's awareness. Now, I say that because when you look at what's happened over the years with protest, again, the people who protest find that they are faced with all sorts of difficulties. They're faced with bans on demonstrations, they're faced with imprisonment, they're faced with arrest. Only this week, more of these and last week, more of the student demonstrators have been charged with quite serious offences, which I hope that all of us will do everything that we can to oppose and to support them in every way that we can. But this is not a new thing. If you look at the history of Trafalgar Square, if you look at the history of Hyde Park, they are repeatedly histories where people have gone and demonstrated there against the wishes of the powers that be. In fact, ever since there has been a police force in London, there has been bans on demonstrations in Hyde Park. It's a very interesting thing. We faced it in 2003 when we wanted to demonstrate over the war in Iraq. We got 2 million people. We were told by Tessa Jowl that we couldn't demonstrate in Hyde Park because it would damage the grass. And we said that we got Michael Foot, who was a former Labour leader, we got all sorts of people. We said we are going to march to Hyde Park and we insist on being let into Hyde Park. And surprise, surprise, a couple of days before the demonstration, they changed their minds and found that the grass would actually survive the experience of a mass demonstration. But if you look, when Karl Marx first came to live in London in the 1850s, there was a very big demonstration in protest at a Sunday trading law, which was aimed against the working class people. It was aimed at people who, the only day of the week they could shop was to shop on a Sunday, and they were going to close all the pubs, all the shops, all the barbers. You wouldn't be allowed to buy a newspaper, you wouldn't be able to do anything on the only day that working class people had off. So they said, the Chartists, who still were in existence in the 1850s, called a demonstration, and they said, we're going to go to Hyde Park to see how much the rich observe the Sabbath and how much they observe the Lord's Day, because of course the rich would go out in their carriages, attended by servants, and drive up and down in Hyde Park. And there was a mass demonstration which assembled in Hyde Park. They put big notices on the gates of the park saying, "You are not, this demonstration is not allowed in, we will not allow a mass of people in." Hundreds of thousands eventually gathered in that park, and surprise, surprise, they were able to defeat the ban. That happened again the following week. It happened again in the 1860s when they had the big demonstrations over reform and for the right of even a bigger section of the working class to vote. And time again, you find that the police attack the demonstrators. You find that the police do everything they can to prevent demonstrations from happening. And that has been going on for hundreds of years now in this country, and it is only the actions of people like us, generation after generation, who have refused to accept this kind of restriction and who have demonstrated and who have been proved right. That, it seems to me, is one of the main arguments for protest. The second argument for protest is that it took working people in this country more than 100 years to get, or nearly 100 years, to get the vote, universal suffrage. It took from the 1832 Reform Bill right through to 1928, when all women were enfranchised on the same basis as men. None of those reforms would have happened in the way that they did without people demonstrating, without people chaining themselves to railings, without people holding public meetings, without people time and again defying the powers that be and coming out and demonstrating. It seems to me that tradition, whether it's for the vote, whether for the right to form a trade union, whether for, in the United States, the movement for civil rights for blacks, which is something that happened even within our own lifetimes, that people had to fight for the right of blacks to sit at the front of the bus and to be able to vote and be able to go into desegregated cafes. All of these things are things that we need to celebrate as things that are very, very important for us. And the only way we will change things in the future is by increasing this level of protest. I mean, I look at the elections yesterday, and you know, there's some results that you might think are okay, but by and large, I thought all of these people, you know, the SNP won in Scotland, but now they're saying, well, we're going to implement all sorts of cuts, and they won on the basis of actually being to the left slightly of the neoliberal agenda, which is being put forward in England. So you don't pay tuition fees, and you don't pay care for old people in homes and so on. All of that is free, and that is obviously something that should be free in any decent society. But essentially, they will be forced to implement cuts. They were backed by most of the big business in Scotland. If you look at Labour is saying we don't want as many cuts, but we still are going to have to make cuts. You know, this is the basic thing. And well, we don't need to talk about the Lib Dems. Let's not intrude into their personal grief this weekend. And we know now, as if we didn't know before, exactly what the Tories are going to do, which is that they are going to use this election result to continue to attack the poorest, the most vulnerable people in this country. So that election, in that sense, hasn't changed anything. What is going to change things is what we do over the next months and years in order to stop the cuts, in order to stop the imperialist wars, because these wars are now spreading. I mean, I think the killing of bin Laden, which they say has drawn a line under the war on terror, and Barack Obama incredibly said yesterday that this was one of the greatest feats of the US military in their history. I mean, you know, rather a kind of insult to people on D-Day and various other things like this. Incredible thing to say. Incidentally, he's speaking to the British Parliament on the 25th of May. So I hope we can have a protest then. I mean, no doubt that will be full of praise for assassination of people who don't have guns and who are, completely illegal assassinations and so on. No doubt he'll be feted as a hero. We have to be the people who stand up and say, we cannot put up with this any longer. And that is what protest is really all about. Now, lots of people say, well, what is the point of marching? It didn't stop the war. I mean, I hear this rather a lot, given that I'm involved in Stop the War. And it's an argument I think is pretty ridiculous, really. I think it's ridiculous for two reasons. Firstly, we didn't stop the war, but if we didn't have an anti-war movement in Britain of the strength that it is today, and it still is one of the strongest in the world, then actually there will be far worse atrocities going on around the world, and therefore it's important to always oppose what imperialism is doing. Secondly, I don't take the view that big demonstrations, as they're called A to B marches, as if you could do anything but go A to B, other than, I suppose, go around in a circle, but usually when you're marching, you have to go from one point to the other. I don't take the view that A to B marches are boring, or necessarily boring, or aren't sufficiently militant enough. I think that actually anybody who was on the 26th of March, that big demonstration was very exciting, it was very invigorating, because it showed working class people for the first time in many years demonstrating in very, very large numbers. And we have to be part, not just of a tiny group of people who can always see there's a more militant thing that needs to be done. We need to be part of a mass movement which can move the movement towards the most militant tactics, but also tries to involve hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people in terms of doing things. And I think that's what we did with the war. Final point I want to make is this, that if you look at most protests, if you look at most demonstrations, socialists have always been at the core of those demonstrations. That was true in the 1850s, where Marx nearly got arrested in Hyde Park. It was true in the 1880s when a demonstrator was killed in Trafalgar Square. The socialists were absolutely the centre of it, people like Eleanor Marx and William Morris. It was true in the 1930s over Cable Street. It's been true right through our history, the modern history of fighting apartheid, of fighting against fascism, all these other things, fighting against war, that socialists are absolutely at the core of that. And that is the point that Joe made, that when you start campaigning over one issue, you begin to link the different issues together. It isn't just about war, it's also about capitalism. It isn't just about the cuts, it's about the whole system which is trying to destroy people's lives. And that is why we have to link all the different movements, all the different protests that are going on, to a much, much bigger fight to overthrow the kind of society in which we live and to establish a socialist society which is based on genuine equality, on production for need, and on people really beginning to fulfil, not just having to protest against what governments are doing, but really beginning to fulfill our potential as human beings and really beginning to look at how we can change the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Lindsay. Well, I've just popped down today from the LGBT conference in Sheffield, where last night 400 students were, well, not all of us, but we were sitting around watching the television and the results coming through and hearing Lib Dem councillors saying, or MPs, whatever, saying, you know, we failed miserably, haven't we? And that is because of the tuition fees, and it's because of the student protests, and we were celebrating that we have made some effect recently, so, you know, we have to keep that up. And also with the Stop the War movement, I mean, this is how I first got involved in protesting. I remember going on that demonstration with a placard saying, an eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, that I'd made out of an old menu, and you know, my how things change. Now on this, you know, now involved in Counterfire, now been involved in student protests and occupations, and it was Stop the War was one of the inspirations for when we occupied over Gaza in our universities in 2009, when Israel laid the siege on Gaza then. That then put the tactic of occupation back on the political map. And then, as we've seen with the student protests and demonstration things recently, we've had another swathe of occupations, the largest, in fact, in British history. And it's on that basis that I'd just like to quickly introduce the book before I introduce the speaker. Chris, just here's the book of the movement. It's not a plug for me, it's a plug for us. It's a collection of all the things that we've been doing. All proceeds go to Palestine Connect, and you know, in memory, or not memory, but you know, the fact that we started off with those occupations over Gaza. You can get it in any good bookshop and also Waterstones. Yes, and many of us are in there. Thank you very much. Yeah. Our next speaker's here, Chris. Not quite, I didn't get to how to introduce you, Chris, so maybe you could introduce yourself, but it's an absolute honour to have you here. Thank you very much. I know it's been a busy morning for you.
Chris Bambery. Chris Bambery, among my other positions until 20 minutes ago, was Secretary of the National Right to Work campaign. I'll continue to be on the officers group of it, but we shall see on that. People can ask about that later. First, I want to bring greetings from the International Socialist Group of Scotland, which people will know. My comrade Pete Remand is also here. We're now over 50 comrades, mainly concentrated in Glasgow. That's not through particular choice, but it should be said it's not a bad city to be based in at this moment in time. And we constitute, as people have seen in the May Day demonstration in Glasgow last weekend, the biggest single activist group on the left in Scotland. That is not an exaggeration. I don't think that's particularly anything to be proud of. Maybe we'll come back to that. The reality is not so good. What I want to start by saying is that really some of the discussion which myself and Andrew tried to introduce into the meeting I've just been at, which is I think we have two elements of the situation in Britain. We have the obvious potential for a resistance to cuts and austerity, demonstrated on the 26th of March, hopefully demonstrated on the 30th of June, although I want to come back to that. Clearly a feeling over the National Health Service and elsewhere, and I think it's very important we understand the potential for that. But I think we also have to factor into that, which we attempted to do at the previous meeting, there is a problem. And it's clear there is a problem on the left, and that was evident on Thursday's elections. We had been told in Scotland and elsewhere that we had been confidently told that Labour was going to sweep the board in Scotland. And the national question in Scotland would be sidelined as a consequence of this. We tried to explain to people that actually people in Scotland, as in Quebec or Catalonia, can vote one way in the Scottish elections and another way in the national elections. It's not very difficult, right? And of course what has happened is we have seen something unbelievable, which is the SNP win a majority in Scotland. That is because of two things. Firstly, on the left, they have positioned themselves to look more radical than the Labour Party, which, led by Ian Gray, is not more difficult. Clearly, as well, there is a problem for Labour south of the border. I think Miliband has some understanding he has to be anti-Tory, but he tries to be anti-Tory, then looks over his shoulder at Wen McCluskey and Mark Sawotka and pulls back from it. And we have not seen a huge success for Labour south of the border. And indeed, we might have differences over the referendum, but I think it's interesting that the AV referendum is projected first as a disaster for the Lib Dems. It was. It's also been projected as a success for Cameron. And Cameron doesn't look too bad after the Thursday's elections. Therefore, there's a problem for the left. And the problem, I think, is put simply. We cannot have a situation in Scotland where we have three different left candidates standing against each other, where we could have had an MSP elected in mid-central Scotland in Fife if there had been one candidate. Right? That cannot continue. We cannot have a situation, if they were going to build a resistance movement, of different competing national campaigns structured around different particular perspectives. The question of unity, I think, now becomes a central issue. And unless we can get unity in building a fight against cuts and austerity, actually the left is not going to have a future. Because the only way the left is going to dig itself out of this hole is by building through self-interest. Our first argument was that, and we should be honest as well and say across Europe, the picture is not fantastically good in terms of the left. There are exceptions in Portugal, the comrades of the left bloc, to an extent in Germany. Elsewhere, it is pretty dire. So we have the same picture in Europe. Resistance, but also a real problem on the left. And this has to be addressed. And in that situation, I think the question of how the resistance develops will determine everything. And the first issue has to be that we, on the left, have to throw ourselves into this anti-cuts movement unreservedly. Absolutely. as we did in 2002, 2003 in the anti-war campaign, every one of us has to be playing a role wherever we are, over whatever the issue is. It could be children's centres where I am, it could be the NHS, it doesn't really matter. But we have to throw ourselves into it and building a burgeoning, what is a developing anti-cuts movement. A movement which is going to develop even if the left does not get involved. Right? So firstly, that has to be an argument. And that was an argument we had and we weren't able to win. And simply intervening, turning up with a pay stable on the outside is not enough. And it's not enough if it's combined with essentially syndicalist politics. That is a legacy of the British left which has dominated for years. A sort of sectarian party building combined, and sterile party building combined with syndicalist politics. You know, that is not enough at the moment. And we have to start by saying that. Secondly, of course we have to accompany that with a very high level of ideological debate and engagement. And I stress the word engagement. Right? Because again, as in previous times, at the beginning of the anti-capitalist movement, if the left is not prepared to listen and engage, it will not grow. It will be marginalised inside this situation. And the ideological nature is not saying we're bringing external. It is part of this resistance. I think it's very obvious in the 26th of March, whatever the limitations, people understand the neoliberal agenda. They understand the New World Order. Much of this is understood and taken as common sense because we're building on something, aren't we? We're building in 10 years of an anti-war, anti-capitalist, anti-poverty movement which provides a platform for this. And I think the question of ideological engagement is very important. And that requires us to confront issues which I think means we have to leave the comfort zone of where we've been for many years. I'll just give you an example. How is the resistance going to develop? Well, I think it's true the 30th of June is a very, very important staging post towards real coordinated strike action. But let's be honest, has the resistance movement elsewhere in Europe just simply evolved as a trade union movement? And the answer is no. In France, in Germany, in Spain, in Portugal, we have seen what is happening here is a dynamic which involves, yes, the trade unions, but also casualised workers, students, pensioners. Right? That's the pattern of struggle, playing off each other and often giving confidence to people. I know in Portugal, I was talking to the Comrades of the Left Bloc, in the private sector is now largely de-unionised. It required quite imaginative tactics of getting blockades, for example, of the main bridge over the Tagus to stop people going to work, to encourage people to take action. They weren't forcing them to strike, but it was a way of getting them to take strike action in the public sector. And that was carried by precarious workers, students, and elsewhere. Right? And everywhere it's been the same. The French events last autumn, it was clear one of the major driving forces was a rebellion among the youth, like we saw in this country. And you cannot talk about the movement on the 26th without factoring in this huge student movement at the beginning of last year. Therefore, I think we have to talk about how the thing is going to develop. And with the night side that, I believe there's going to be a primacy of politics. I believe the political ideological efforts are absolutely important of it. That is what's going to give confidence to people in the workplace to fight at the end of the day. And seeing other people on the streets. A huge anti-cuts movement on the streets, taking direct action, will encourage strike action. That's the first thing. The second argument I want to put, which is an argument I've really not been able to pursue, is what does the working class look like in 2011? The answer I was repeatedly given was there are 200 to 250,000 shop stewards and union representatives in Britain. Everything is fundamentally okay. Well, it's not. The simple truth is most of those people are bogged down in grievance procedures. In lots of places it is a facade. You go into most hospitals, to be honest, there is a unison notice board, but that's almost the level of it. There is nothing, things are quite seriously wrong, and we have to talk about that. And clearly, there is a problem in terms of the reality of work in 2011. Lots of people under the age of 30 are in jobs which are casual, agency, what I call precarious. I was attacked for being Italianata for using that phrase, but it's the phrase that's used in Europe in the terms of it. Where do students fit in? Which brings me to the third element. How is the student struggle going to explode? The one model we were offered was 68. Well, I don't believe 68 is going to repeat itself, because I think students have fundamentally changed since then. When I went to college, you used to get Wednesday afternoon off for sports. I mean, I didn't have to work. Now student life is very, very different. The comrades in Glasgow who've been organising among bar workers, supermarket workers and call centre workers are students who work in crap jobs. How is that going to change? And I think it's clear in the autumn that it's not going to be like 68, and there's a series of fundamental differences taking place. Lastly, I think we also have to have a discussion on Leninism in 2011 for those of us who still hold to Lenin and his ideas, which I hope is the case here, because I think it's not good enough, as one leading comrade still in the SWP said to me, to be trying to relate to 1968 using a model of the party built in 1986. Now, you can argue over whether it's 68 or not, but I think he's correct. You know, if you look at the tradition which I come from, and I think I'm aware that in both groups here today, that not everyone comes from a SWP tradition, and I think that's a good thing, right, because I think things are going to develop. But actually, if you look back into the SWP tradition, it wasn't just simply a question of building a branch meeting and a Saturday paper sale. You know, look at 1968, when the shit hit the fan. Tony Cliff at the time issued a unity appeal. It wasn't answered, but actually it was a bold move. And if he'd succeeded in pulling Tariq Ali into the building a united revolutionary left, things could have been much different at the time. The decisions to launch a rank-and-file movement, workplace branches, the Anti-Nazi League, the Right to Work campaign in the 1970s were all a break with that politics which just simply looked at branch meetings and paper sales. On an international scale, if you look at the 1970s, the IS as it was prepared to engage with the forces who were at the head of resistance movements, whatever their formal ideologies. If it was avant-garde opera in Italy, or the PRP in Spain, they weren't Trotskyists, they weren't this, that, and the rest of the thing. It didn't go through a checklist. You looked at what they were doing and engaged to try and influence them. And therefore, I think there has to be a discussion about what Leninism means in 2011 in terms of it. Now, I have to wind up. I also want to say that the ISG Scotland has invited Counterfire to meet with us on Thursday. 4 comrades from Counterfire will be travelling to Glasgow. I think since Counterfire was born, I think the two groups have evolved in different ways. I actually know very little of Counterfire, for obvious reasons. And there's been very little engagement. The comrades in Glasgow don't really know anything either. I think there's going to have to be a process of getting to know each other, of engagement and debate. I think, however, there's this. I think all of us realise there is the potential for a coming together which could pull in wider forces and bigger forces. I'd be very careful that when we come together, if we can come together, and I hope we will, and I think the comrades would love to see that, and we can pull in wider forces, that we don't just proclaim this as the revolutionary party, right, and say it, but actually I think we have to think about how we are going to, what sort of organisation we'd like to move on towards, which can address some of those issues. And it's not just going to simply be an SWP Mark II, because we, as I say, we're recruiting people who have not been in the SWP. There are clearly people here who have not been in the SWP. It would be folly just simply to replicate SWP Mark II and sort of re-elect a shadow central committee of the same people from 10 years, whatever it was. That would be stupid. And I think we have to discuss that. And that's what I'm going to really leave you on today. And I'm pleased to be here today. And I'm pleased I want to find out more about Counterfire. I think Pete, the same and comrades in Glasgow want to do. And we'll be issuing a series of invitations to come to Scotland to address forums, to address internal meetings, school we're having in the summer, to extend that cooperation and debate. That will also include other forces. We obviously have a job to do in the Scottish left, where I think we have to seriously take the question of unity. I talked to a leading activist in the SSP. There is obviously deep divisions over this. I'm going to end. But actually, we agreed we have to fight for left unity in Scotland. What happened in Scotland was a debacle. A collapse of the SWP. It is now time to move on. If we don't move on, we're doomed. Right? And we have to return to this. And we're not going to get this by formal agreements in Scotland parties. It is about cooperation and building a resistance movement and seeing what comes from that. So I'll leave you his thoughts for the day. And I hope that the cooperation continues and we have a beneficial meeting on Thursday in Glasgow, which can lead to more.
Thank you, Chris. I can only just imagine, try to imagine what you've been through this morning. So the fact that you're such a resilient resistor is another reason why...
It wasn't that bad. I knew everyone in the room. That was the most depressing aspect of it.
Well, you're still standing, you're still fighting, and that's what we all want to be doing here, isn't it? So thanks for coming, Chris. Our final speaker, before we open up to the floor for questions and discussions and contributions and stuff, has become a bit of a phenomenon on YouTube recently. When you watch the video that Sanum has made, you just think, what amazing clarity of understanding what happened on the day, amazing video technique, editing techniques, and a message that so many of my student friends have seen the video and knew exactly who you were when I said Sanum Ghafoor is speaking. So it brings me great pleasure to introduce Sanum Ghafoor. Thank you.
really big-headed already now. Thank you very much for that. Okay, now I feel as though there's a lot of pressure on me. So this is one of my first times doing this, so bear with me, guys. Sorry I'm late, by the way, trains. Boris Johnson, whatever his name is. Because I just was looking over and I was like, wow, that's the guy from Transporter. So it looks like you're non-celebrity. Good example, isn't it? Right, so, alright, so, sorry, he's going to be blushing all over, I apologise. Alright, so, I'm talking about if protests can change the world, and my sister's just walked in late, well done. I think lateness just runs in our family. Alright, so can protests change the world? Hands up, who thinks protests can change the world? Yeah, oh wow, that was easy, alright. Fair enough. Okay, so yeah, of course protests can change the world. We look in history, we can see the women didn't have votes until 1920. We see the African American people didn't have votes until 1870. So we do see progress being made. Even if we look in today's day and age, we see that with Egypt and Tunisia. I'm not going to speak about that because there's more knowledgeable people than that, and I wouldn't do it justice if I spoke about it. So yeah, they'll speak about that. Right, the first protest I ever went to was a protest that was defending WikiLeaks and defending Julian Assange. Now WikiLeaks seeks to bring information, well, trying to expose information basically that the government is hiding from us. So it was a brilliant cause being there. Anyone with a few brain cells and a bit of a moral compass would know that WikiLeaks is a brilliant organisation, even though the Robert Gates loves saying it's a threat to the US Army. Don't know how it's a threat to the US Army, but yeah, that's right. One thing I will say about that is Julian Assange was actually up for Times Person of the Year alongside Barack Obama and David Cameron. Don't know if that's someone's idea of a sick joke or something, but yeah, Julian Assange actually lost to Robert Gates, who was Secretary of Defense. Secretary of Defense in itself is, there's a bit of dishonesty with Secretary of Defense. 50 odd years ago, you wouldn't have called it Secretary of Defense, you would have called it Minister for War. And at least with that, there's an element of honesty. So, yeah, well done, Robert Gates, right. Why should we pray right? I get people that say to me all the time, what's the point of us protesting? We shouldn't protest. One person isn't going to make a difference if I take to the streets, or if I sit at home and watching EastEnders, it won't make much of a difference. But one person, they always use that excuse, one person can't make a difference. But if we look in history, one person, Rosa Parks was one person, Malcolm X was one person, Martin Luther King was one person, Rachel Corrie was one person, Tristan Anderson was one person, you're one person, Claire Solomon's one person, you are one person, I'm one person. So one person can make a difference. Obviously one person, so Rosa Parks, she was like a pioneer for the movement. She sat down so we could all stand up and be heard for, so she sat down and refused to, hold on, let me get this right. She sat down and refused to stand up for someone that was trying to take her seat. That sounded a lot different in my head, but yeah, it did make sense. Alright, so yeah, one candle can just wipe out all the darkness like that. So don't ever think, no, there's no point in me going to this, I can't make a difference, because every single person can make a difference. Right, so when people say, why should we protest? First thing I'd say is, why shouldn't we protest? It might sound like a 3-year-old response, but I think that's actually the best thing to say. Why shouldn't we protest? Personally, I think it's our duty and our responsibility to take to the streets and protest against something that our government is doing, that we oppose, whether we're opposing, hold on, I'm mixing up my notes here. Right, so it's our duty to be a voice for the voiceless. I don't think Robert Gates is going to be a voice for the 17 people that were killed by the US drones yesterday in Pakistan. I don't think the American people yesterday that were chanting after Barack Obama's death, Osama bin Laden's death, chanting USA, USA. I doubt that they'd be chanting exactly the same if they knew the effects of the depleted uranium on the deformed children in Iraq. The IDF, they're not going to be a voice for the Palestinian children that they are massacring. Iman Darwish was a 13-year-old Palestinian child that was shot over 17 times by an Israeli soldier. The soldier then went on to say, I would have done exactly the same as she was 3 years old. I don't see the IDF standing up and being a voice for these children. And Barack Obama, I don't think he'd be a voice for Abir, a 14-year-old Palestinian child who was gang raped by US soldiers, and then in an attempt to cover up the atrocity, they set her alight. I don't see any of these people being a voice for these people. It's people like you and I that need to take to the streets and protest against what our government's doing. So there's a quote from Eve Miriam who said, I dream of giving birth to a child who will ask, Mother, what is war? Now, I was really blown away by that quote in itself, but the sad reality is there are children in Palestine, there are children in Gaza, there are children in Fallujah who don't ask mother what was war, they ask mother what was peace. They've never known peace. Since they came into the world, there was either a US drone whacking into someone's house, or a soldier shooting down their friends, or someone bombing one of their houses. So it is our duty to stand up for these people. Right, so the media, if all these deaths I just talked about were televised, just as Osama bin Laden's death was, Palestine would be free. Iraq would not have thousands and thousands of soldiers still in there, even though they killed Saddam Hussein 4 years ago. Don't know what they're still doing there, but yeah. Right, so the prince and the princess, lovely, they had a lovely fairy tale wedding. It was televised on probably every single news channel in the world. So 2 rich people get married, everyone covers it. 2 million children, 2 million men, 2 million women in Iraq were killed, and none of the news channels show it. The media is completely silent. Just because Prince William is born into a family of royalty, it doesn't make him any different to you and I. It doesn't make him any different to an Israeli child. It doesn't make him any different to a Palestinian child. Everyone is born the same. It doesn't matter what you're born into, what social class, what family. At the end of the day, it matters about the good you do. Okay, so yeah, we shouldn't stand for anything. We shouldn't stand for it. We shouldn't take it. We shouldn't stand for the illegal occupation of Iraq. We shouldn't stand for the fact George Osborne spends £47 of taxpayers' money buying a DVD of himself and his speech. £47.
You watched it on YouTube.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to watch that. I'm going to charge you £47. We shouldn't stand for the fact Andrew Lansley he claimed over £21,000 of taxpayers' money to sort out his second home. I've only got one house, I don't know about him, he's got 2 houses, he's sorting out the second one. But at the same time, he's trying to shred our NHS to pieces. So he's spending all this money, but he's fine with slashing our NHS. 3 minutes, okay, I can do that. We shouldn't stand for the war crimes committed by Israel against the indigenous people of Palestine. It is up to me and you to take to the streets and protest against it. I hate when people say, oh, protesting, it won't do anything, it won't change anything. Did you not see a 30-year dictatorship of tyranny just crushed in a matter of only 18 days? So if anyone says protesting doesn't make a difference, just tell them to shut up and just tell them to Google Egypt revolution and yeah. Passionate about, I suggest you literally get off your backside and go do something about it. No point being an armchair revolutionist or just sitting around the dinner table arguing politics with your dad. That's what me and my dad tend to do actually a lot. So you've got to physically make a difference, whether it be by going to a protest, standing outside the American embassy, distributing leaflets, educating other people, boycotting goods, or making videos on YouTube like a sad person I know used to do. Yeah. Okay, so will the revolution be televised or will it be tweeted or anything like that? We don't know that yet, as we haven't had our own revolution. We don't even know if it will be in our lifetime or not. But what I can say, it won't be easy. Whatever revolution that happens, it won't be easy. It's going to be a lot of hard work, so only time will tell. I'm going to end with a quote from Gandhi, who said, "Be the change you want to see in the world." And with that, I'm finished. Thank you for listening. Bye!
Thank you, Sanum. And if you haven't seen Sanum's video on YouTube, it's called March 26th, What Really Happened, and it really is fantastic. And I know a lot of people that were coming to the meeting were hoping to see the jumping effect that you did in it, and I think you encapsulated that spirit marvellously. So we are now going to open up to anybody that wants to say, something, ask something, whatever, really.